All right. Well, hey, welcome back to the Sandcrawler. This is going to be episode 5, I believe. And we're doing a little bit different this time. We're actually going on camera. Ben left his room on in the background. Daniel did too. There, I felt compelled to do the exact same thing. So it's a little weird to see ourselves on camera. I never got past the pandemic thing where I end up looking at myself and then back and forth to people throughout. So I will do my level best not to do that. But we have a special guest today. So here on episode 5, volume 2, a long time, I'm going to say it, friend. Ben, we've known each other for, gosh, almost a decade. But Ben is our first real sort of Star Wars celebrity that we wanted to have on. You have a deep and real, and I would even go so far as to say very legitimate connection to Star Wars, whereas we're just fanboys. So we really appreciate you making the time to be on the show today. Before we kind of jump in and talk a little bit about that, Daniel, anything you wanted to talk about, housekeeping, before we kind of jumped in?
Sure. This is like the perfect time to do an interview. Been really happy to have you on. We'll do some promo on your stuff. KS Geekman, as you can see on our screen, to follow on Instagram. Ben has like way more followers in the podcast, so we're probably the ones that are getting promoted by him rather than the other way around. But this is an awesome chance for us to do a feature on Ben. He's just like a really good member of the community. We wanted to bring in folks that have ties to like professional Star Wars stuff, and that's just so cool. And so really excited about it. We'll do a little bit of a bigger giveaway at the end. I'm not going to reveal it quite yet, but we're going to do a little bit of a bigger giveaway. And I'm just really excited. This is good, well timed, because we got into sort of a cadence of doing episode recaps, and that's really not what this show is about. And so it was great to bring in an interview. And so I'm just really excited for it. So let's get cooking.
Yeah. Ben, you got to remind me, man, when did we first meet? I mean, we met through Instagram, like a lot of people, but I'm trying to think, has it been almost a decade?
Gosh, man, Jeff, I think it's probably been around that. I know I started that, my nerd Instagram account, the Kansas Geekman account was 2014. So it was like 9 years ago. So it might have been around that time. I'm not sure. I met so many great people when I started that account, and I really just started it so I could have a safe place to be a geek without intruding on my family and friends feeds with my nerd stuff. So I was like, you know what? I'm just going to make a second account so I can post pictures of toys and talk about Star Wars without being asked by my professional people and my friends, like, hey, you really like that Star Wars? That's you seem a little obsessed. So I'm like, you know what? I think I'm going to go over here. And yeah, so I think you and I, it's probably been around that time. I feel like 2015 at least, or 16. But I know you and I have met in person. I think we did some hot toy exchanges in person since we're both collectors. And that's been at least 4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
So.
It's funny you say that. I think, Daniel, I'll speak for you too. My wife always compliments me on the fact that I am one of the few people she knows that kept Instagram curated, like as best as possible. Like I have a personal account, but you're right. Like I remember starting this account and just like you, I have some friends that kind of are borderline voyeurs. Like I feel like they peep in and they're kind of like, what is all this? And I'm like, this isn't for you. It was never for
Hold on,
you.
guys.
Right.
This is, if we're talking about, to your point, safe spaces, like this is not your culture. This is my nerd culture. And like if you want in, then we'll have to have a conversation, but all good. Well, Ben, like, one of the things I wanted to just ask was, we talked about it briefly before, just inside conversations, but tell us a little bit about, your connection to Star Wars in the card sense, in the professional sense, in the artistry sense. As a side note, I love your stuff. I've been waiting to try to commission you for something for a while. I know life and things get in the way, but again, just tell us more about, how you got into this world.
Yeah. Oh, in fact, the fact that you mentioned that, I think you asked me about it a long time ago, and I think life did get in the way of stuff. But yeah, first of all, I just want to thank you guys for inviting me to be a part of this, and your generous and gracious compliments and words are very heartfelt. So thank you. Yeah, as far as the getting involved with Star Wars, what I started in around 2015. I met someone who was a friend of mine. Somebody that I met, and he was doing trading cards for Topps, and he was a guy that was in the industry doing art, and he did animation for the Batman TV show in the 90s, and He was a part of that whole thing. And I was like, oh my gosh, and growing up, I wanted to do comic book art. I wanted to actually pursue that at one point. And then the trajectory of my life changed. And so I put that to the side. And so I told him when I met him, I said, man, you're doing exactly what I was desiring to do. And he's like, hey, he saw my stuff. And he's like, you're actually not too bad. I bet if you put a portfolio together, submitted it to Topps, if you just kind of keep practicing, I bet you could do this. And he told me what it was like. They just give you the cards and you just do it on the side and meet their deadlines. And so in 2015, I started drawing again after having not drawn for quite some time in my life. And I would post pictures on Instagram. And I think on my Instagram, Daniel, you mentioned how that account has a lot of followers. Well, it exploded right before all the algorithm stuff changed. And it was around when The Force Awakens was being, talked about and was so heavy in people's minds in 2015. And the account Star Wars Siths on Instagram, his name is Chris. He shared one of my drawings because he and I were talking back and forth, and his account had 300,000. So we shared one of my drawings. And then I just remember one day it was like, boom, 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 boom. I just exploded with followers. And so at that point, I started drawing and sharing that stuff on my Instagram. And then I had someone say, hey, how much for that drawing? And I'm like, somebody wants to buy my drawing. Somebody's willing to pay for it. So I was like, okay, yeah, $25. And they're like, sold. I'm like, okay. And so I noticed that people were, so I was like, okay, well, I must be good enough to maybe submit that portfolio. And I did. And in 2016. And my first project was with Upper Deck. And I did it. It was for the movie Clerks. Really bizarre, very strange. But I did that. Yeah. So it was my foot in the door with the professional stuff. And then from there, I was invited to do, I think it was Spider-Man. There was a Spider-Man Ultra Fleer, Spider-Man or something for Upper Deck. And then I got Topps knocked on my door and said, hey, would you like to do the Rogue One movie? And so that was my actual first project, was working for Rogue One. So I did sketch cards for the Rogue One. I think it was series 2. So it was the second set that came out right when the movie actually hit theaters. And so that was my first, and that was like 2016, the end of 2016 into 2017. And then from there, I just kept doing every project that was coming out from Star Wars. And then I was doing random things for Upper Deck. And for Topps, I did a few other things like Stranger Things and Walking Dead. I did a season 7, I think it was season 7 of Walking Dead. And then in 2019, I was like, you know what? They asked if I wanted to try baseball. So I did that and I hated it. So because they were like, you have to choose these baseball players from last season. And I'm like, I don't keep, the Royals are terrible. So I don't keep up with baseball that much anymore. Modern baseball. So I didn't know who any of the players were. So I just combed through the all-star team of the year before and just drew everybody I could from that. So I hated that. And yeah, so I've just, started doing it that way and just accepted every Star Wars project that would come through until I think I stopped around 2020 is when I was like, I can't keep up with it right now. So I put it on pause. And right now I'm working on a project for Upper Deck for Marvel. So
very cool.
Yeah.
In total, Ben, how many cards do you think you've illustrated?
Oh gosh. I don't know. It's probably more than 500, I would think. It's probably more than that. Yeah.
Wow.
That's crazy. Yeah.
I think because there was one
500, but wow. Yeah, that's
there was one set I actually did 100, and that was for the 40th anniversary Star Wars A New Hope in 2017. They asked if I wanted to do 100, and I was like, sure, I can draw 100 cards. And that was a mistake. So I decided I would never do that again.
When you look back at the stuff you've done on the Star Wars front, I think I have a guess, but I'm not going to spoil it. I'm curious, is there a particular card or character that you've drawn that you felt a strong affinity to, or you can easily look back and say, this is my favorite thing, maybe at the time to draw, or looking back now, that's easily my favorite character to draw?
Oh, drawing a character. I would say character-wise, it's usually clone troopers and stormtroopers. I'm a trooper guy. I enjoy drawing troopers a lot. but I love there when I've done sets, I usually look at a set. My favorite types of sets to draw are things like Galactic Files, or I think it was Star Wars Galaxy or Star Wars Masterwork. Because when they invite you to those, you can draw any era of Star Wars, or any, you can do the clone, you could do the sequels, prequels, original trilogy. They don't care, just as long as it's Star Wars. So those are my favorite sets that I would draw on. But typically when I'm sitting down and I'm not thinking, I will just draw a Stormtrooper or a Clone Trooper or Boba Fett, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's good choices. Let me ask you this. Oftentimes we see, something that someone can be passionate about and a fan of when they're actually introduced to it as a profession, or even if it's like even if you would consider it a side gig, it becomes work more than love. Have you ever wrestled with that? Has that come up?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yes, in fact, I think it was the summer of 2019, I realized I was spending, I was working on baseball, I was working on a Star Wars project, and then I was working on, I think it was like a Marvel, The Punisher or something, all at the same time. And then I had other cards waiting for me to do. And I just sat there. I remember one day just drawing, and I was like, I think I need to stop for a season, because it was just, I was not enjoying it. And I really didn't necessarily, it wasn't something I needed to do. Like I was like, it was not ever a desire to just let art be my thing for, to support my family and those kinds of things. So it was more really just for me, an enjoyment thing and something I really loved. And so I was finding that I was losing the joy. So when I started, I thought, if I ever get to a point where I'm not enjoying what I'm doing, just stop. It's not necessary. Just push pause. So that's really around the time I kind of decided to step away for a bit, for a season. And then I just got that invite, as I mentioned, to a Marvel project recently. So I decided, let me give it a shot. So
Do you ever feel that way as a collector? Like, and I'm steering it into this territory just given our backgrounds. I mean, our literal backgrounds right now. Like, I find that there are times, and it maybe coincides with the release of a certain film or a property, or there might even just be like the general sort of state of the union with a property, where I, as a collector, sometimes find like I get tired or a little bit apathetic. And I was curious, like, is that just me being overly cynical, or do you feel that way too sometimes?
yeah, yes, I would say that if I were to look at what I used to purchase and collect 5 years ago, is much different than what I do now. And now a lot of that was as I was collecting like the Hasbro stuff, right? At one point I was like a completist, and you can't keep up with that. That's like, I mean, some people do. There's some friends on Instagram that I'm like, dude, I don't know how you're keeping up, but the Hasbro 6-inch stuff, the Black Series, when they started in 2013, like 10 years ago, which is crazy to think. I mean, I jumped on board right at the beginning, and that was when, not very many people were. They thought it was kind of silly. A lot of people thought it was silly. And so that first wave was ridiculously priced. People were spending a lot to get that now. But I think when the quality of stuff started to change with Hasbro back around 2017, when the sequel stuff was coming out, I could tell on the packaging, I could tell on the paint applications and that kind of stuff. That kind of drove me to it actually broke my desire to feel like I had to be a completist. I mean, I was buying something. Sometimes I would buy a figure that I would open, and then I buy a second one to keep in a box. I mean, you can't you can't raise a family doing things
Right.
like that forever. So I would say probably, yeah, I would agree, Jeff. I think that's it's not unusual for people to go through that. And I became it also was not something I was enjoying. So I was like, you know what, just stop. And so I actually opened a third Instagram account that I think I called it Geek Flag Fly. It's still sitting out there, but I would sell toys on there, and I started selling a lot of that stuff at the time.
I definitely think there was a point with Black Series, like so much like you, before the algorithm changed. It was actually Matt at Star Wars: The Black Series that reposted one of mine, and this sounds like very it's going to come out the wrong way. It's still Star Wars Black Series most liked post in the history of his account. It was that
That's
like
awesome.
Obi-Wan post I did of like all the figures that I customized or had other people customize with me. And then the algorithm hit and I really kind of plateaued. But shortly thereafter, like when the Force Awakens stuff came out, for me, I was much like you. Like I would find myself buying things and then like I would put it away. Like, and then that was it. Like there was no interaction with it. And I felt like, curating a Hot Toys room or a 1/6 scale room is important. And bringing it back to what you do, it wasn't until recently that I sort of like rediscovered my love of cards, and specifically like the Topps world to me seems like really scary and daunting because I'm learning a lot about, like you mentioned it before we started, like refractors, and this is like 1 of 20, 1 of 60. This one has my signature. This one's foil.
Green border, red border, yellow border.
Yeah, right. And there's guys
Yep.
I started to follow on Instagram that are like knee deep in this stuff. I rediscovered my love of like the old Star Wars Decipher cards from like the mid 90s because that's middle school for me. Like that was a big deal. But one thing I did want to talk about with you on that front was like your General Grievous card. So like this is for our listeners, and I'm not blowing smoke, Ben. Like this is an iconic piece of Star Wars art. Like I see this all the time when I'm trolling eBay to go buy stuff, and I'm like, I know Ben. Like I know this. Like I know who did this. I talked to him. I've met him many times.
I'm secretly proud of that as well. I'm like, I know that.
Yeah,
guy.
like
awesome.
this card.
I got some VIP passes.
So I have to just ask you a little bit about the history of this card. And like, I mean, it's an incredible design for those that can't see it, that are listening on Spotify or Apple or whatever. Ben did, and I'm probably using the wrong art terms, but effectively like almost like a bust line shot of General Grievous. And this is, to me, as a history nerd, by the way, Ben, like this is like very evocative of the sort of World War I, World War II era, like propaganda posters we would see of like sort of this iconic leader. And then in the background, you have basically like the droid ships flying. You have some of his like Magna Guards and some of the Trade Federation droids. It's a really cool piece of art. I guarantee if you guys just Google like Ben AbuSaada Grievous or Topps Grievous card, like this will be the first thing that comes up. But tell us about this, man. Like I want to know how this came into the ether of sort of being the card.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thanks guys for the compliments. It was a fun project, and I would say that this particular project, I mean, as an artist and as a kid who grew, a guy that grew up as a kid loving Star Wars, and also this particular set, which is the Galaxy set. For those of you that are into the Topps trading cards, or at least peripherally understand what that set is, this set originated, I think it was first released in 1993. And it was a pretty iconic trading card set, the first series. And this was, I believe, series 7 or 6 or 7. I can't remember exactly. I don't even think they numbered it, because I think the one before it was released in 2012. So it had been quite some time before they revisited the Galaxy set. But so this was quite an honor for me when they asked me to do a card. And it wasn't, typically I'll get invites to do the sketch cards for a trading card set, which are usually the chase cards, right? So when they ask you to do an actual piece of art that will be mass produced and printed for an artist who does this, that's a pretty complimentary, or it feels really good to get that invite. It's like, holy cow, they really want to mass produce my work. So for me, it was like the pinnacle of doing this. It was a dream as a kid. Like, man, someday I want to draw for Star Wars. And so this was like, oh, wow, I get to be a part of a set I remember buying and collecting when I was 18 years old back in 1993. So just to get that invite was amazing. And so the invitation came in 2017. This set was released in December of 18. And the first set was. And then on the invite, they said, hey, we'd like to invite you to submit an idea. So you had to send in like a typed out idea. So I had two concepts in mind. My first concept was one that I had drawn a sketch cover. And my idea initially was to make, how on the Star Wars theater posters, the original trilogy, and really, I think pretty much most of them, you would see Darth Vader's looming head in the background, and you'd see all the heroes in the foreground, right? So you had this looming threat behind you that, all the heroes were having to deal with. So my thought was like, what would it be like to do the opposite? What if you were doing the Imperial perspective and the looming threat was Luke Skywalker's head in the background? And then you had in the foreground all these Imperial type things, right? And then my second idea was to do a general, like a prequel card, and do General Grievous, kind of a similar type thing, but you're not doing heroes and villains. It's really more just almost like you said, Jeff, like a propaganda type thing. Like you're just the inspiration of General Grievous, because you think about Revenge of the Sith and the text that goes up at the beginning, the scroll, talks about there's heroes on both sides, right? And so General Grievous for the CIS, he was a hero. He was helping carry the mantle of the cause of the Confederacy of Independent Systems to fight the unjust republic who was, imposing itself upon a bunch of systems that didn't like its laws and its rules and that kind of thing. So get into politics of Star Wars there. But so that was kind of my thought, was like, to do what you said. And so I submitted the ideas, and they said, hey, could you do the prequel one? And I think that's probably because a lot of people were submitting, some of the other artists were probably submitting a lot of original trilogy stuff, and they were probably looking at the whole scope and going, okay, let's do a prequel. We got somebody who wants to do prequel. Let's make sure we get some of that representation in there. That's my story. I think that's how they probably did it. So from there, I drafted, just did a quick sketch of what it would look like. And they said, gave it a thumbs up and said, all right, go for it. And so I started drafting it. And through the process, I'd have to submit, I think it was probably 2 or 3 times we submitted designs as we were going through. Like I would do the pencils, and before I went to inks, I would submit it and say, does this look okay? And they'd give it a thumbs up. So then I would lay the ink down, the line work. And then after that, I would lay down the color. Then after I laid the color down, I think when I did the color, I initially had that General Grievous starship. It was more like a olive green tint, army green. And I think I was using a reference that was like a toy of some sort. And the toy picture that I had, because I didn't actually have that particular toy, it looked like it was green to me online. So they said, hey, can you change the color? I was like, oh crap, I don't know how I'm going to do that. So I had to go back through on the ink and just really spend some time blending in some blue in that, and change the green to blue. And then after that, submitted the work, and it had to be approved by Lucasfilm. And we had to sign a contract with Lucasfilm on it, and they own it. I can't reprint it. I can't do anything with it. I have the original artwork, but they own the actual thing. So, which means they can, if Lucasfilm were to go, hey, let's look through our General Grievous stuff, and someday I could be walking down the street and somebody's wearing my art on their shirt or something, and I would have no say or even knowledge. In fact, in 2021, Topps redid they did a Galaxy set, which they called the Chrome Galaxy set. And I think that was the first year they chromified all of some of their stuff. And so they took this one and they reprinted it. And without my knowledge, I didn't know. They didn't have to ask permission or anything. And I started getting tagged on social media by collectors. And I was like, oh, wow, they redid my art. That's pretty awesome. And so they did a refractor shiny version and all that. So yeah, it's been in 2 different products by Topps, which was exciting. So that's kind of how the process went. I still own the original. And if I ever want to sell it, I'm supposed to get permission from Lucasfilm, which I don't know. I don't know that I've not heard positive things from some of the artists. I think they wanted to do that and they don't hear back from them. So.
Well, here's how nerdy I am.
Yeah.
Here's how nerdy I am. I would frame the agreement. I'd be like, oh my God, this is an official Lucasfilm contract.
I was
framed.
The only interaction I've ever had personally with Lucasfilm was when you become an Eagle Scout. Typically, you can send a bunch of these like notifications, and you get back responses from like tons of people, and it's usually very personalized. Like Clint Eastwood sent me like an autographed picture and a hand note. All the Supreme Court justices, former presidents. And I was so hoping on George Lucas. And I have a letter from Lucasfilm, and it's about 1 paragraph long, written in with Courier font from a typewriter. And it's just, while Mr. Lucas has like never been involved in the Boy Scouts of America and is like not particularly like interested in it, but commend you for your achievement. And then it was like his secretary, and I was like, that's it. Like that's all I got. Yeah, I saved the letter. It's like super depressing, but
this isn't really our thing, but pretty cool, nerd.
Yeah, way to go.
Now it's back to our sci-fi stuff.
Yeah. But
Sir.
well, Ben, I was going to ask you. I mean, so on this topic, and like to transition it a little bit, you're one of the, your interest in the prequels is interesting because we were just talking before we recorded. We're in the same sort of milieu of generations. I think we hit Star Wars in a point where we weren't old enough to see it in the theaters when it was first released, or maybe you saw ROTJ when you were a kid, but we largely lived in that sort of era of THX release, West End games, Star Wars Heir to the Empire was kind of like re-emerging, and then the toy line Power of the Force 2 kicked, and then the special edition and all that jazz. I mean, I lived a lifetime of Star Wars, I guess, before 1999 when the Phantom Menace came out. But I say that because what it felt like until maybe, gosh, 8 or 9 years ago, Daniel backed me up, was that the prequels still had sort of like a, I almost felt like even Hayden Christensen was sort of a pejorative, like in the Star Wars fan community. And you're one of the first people in the community that I talked to that was like, I will double down. Like, I love Revenge of the Sith. And, as I matured and got a little bit older and really kind of re-explored those films, especially in the wake of the sequel trilogy, like I came not only to like them, but love them. I even love Attack of the Clones. I have no problem saying it. So I'm curious, like, what was it? Did you always feel that way about the prequel trilogies? And did you always sort of identify out of the gate that you loved Revenge of the Sith, like starting in 2005?
Yeah. First of all, let me say you're very generous in your assumption of my age, but I'm a Gen Xer, so I did go see I did see A New Hope when it wasn't A New Hope.
Awesome.
Yeah,
Okay.
in the theater. So I'm one of the OTs, but which is a lot of times it surprises people because of my affinity for the prequels, because they assume OT people just don't like the prequels at all, and that's never been the case for me. I loved the prequels when they came out. I love the Phantom Menace now. I loved it in 1999. I think I saw it in the theaters in 99 probably 8 times, and then when it came out on 3D in 2012, I saw it 7 times. And I think on the 7th time, as I sat halfway through by myself, I was like, I think I'm done. But I think there's a couple things with movies that that I associate with. There's the movie itself, there's the time frame and everything that's happening in culture, and it just reminds me of a certain era and time in my life. And then there's like things that happen, like family or whatever, going into a movie, right? So there's those types of things that I associate with movies. So as far as the movie itself and the story, I've just always been fascinated by that. I think that one of the parting things for a lot of original trilogy fans, OT fans, they did not like the visual. Like they were like, why is everything so shiny? When the Phantom Menace came out, they didn't quite grasp it. It was like too different for them. And for me, I was always like, well, it makes sense. I mean, you have to. It's a story. It's a six books in a series in essence, and you have to think of starting it off. The Empire was supposed to be the thing that ran things into the ground. And that's why everything looked so dirty and used in the original trilogy. And that's why Phantom Menace looked the way it did, right? It was a different era and time. And
Yep.
so, George was great I think he just was phenomenal at using visuals to help tell the story. And I think he accomplished that when he made the prequels, to really help illustrate even better why the OT was the way it was. So there was that, the visual storytelling. And then of course, I love the story itself, the idea of, a religious order and being too tied to a government that was, that collapsed and in on itself, and they were happy to be tools of that government in breaking what their order was supposed to be about, because they got caught up. And I think Yoda explains that in Attack of the Clones when he's talking to Mace Windu. He talks about how the Jedi are becoming too arrogant. The young kids, the whippersnappers, are taking too much joy in their role, and they're that kind of thing. I don't.
Off my lawn, you should get.
Yeah, get off my lawn. Off my lawn. Yeah, I love that. So anyway, I just loved. I loved it from the beginning. I think it's a great story, and I think there's the idea of following the the fall of someone who was a hero, and then following the idea of like Count Dooku. I loved that character back then, and I think I always like what they did with Tales of the Jedi recently on that is exactly what I had always envisioned happening with him. Like he was just a Jedi that he actually saw what was happening, right? The idea that there's this guy who saw that the Jedi were taking the wrong path. Unfortunately for him, his solution to the problem was not the best, was not the right thing to do, but he wasn't wrong, right? And that's why I think Qui-Gon Jinn was probably the best Jedi ever, was because he saw it and knew it. And anyway, so man, I just went down a rabbit hole, but
no, we love it. We love it.
Kind of unpacks for you what my thoughts on the prequels are, why I love them. I just think there's a lot of depth there, and I think people get too caught up with not liking Jar Jar Binks that they can't get beyond that. And I think that I always thought that was really sad because they're missing out on a lot of good storytelling there.
The same is true with Hayden to an extent. Like people, a lot of my friends just made fun of his acting. And let me I think you can divide this into two segments. Like objectively, like does he act according to the letter of like the Stanislav method or whatever? And like, is he on the level of like a Daniel Day-Lewis in Attack of the Clones? No. But as a Star Wars fan, like I've always thought it was fun because you have sort of this infinite pool of context and story that I always thought, like, now looking back, he's acting exactly how an 18-year-old kid who's never been around other people, never been around, frankly, like women, never been around like people who just understand what being normal is like. And then he's simultaneously pumped with like a constant feed of people telling you, like, not only are you the most brilliant one, you might actually be chosen. You might actually have this, and combining all these things, like, I think it kind of fits perfectly that he is wooden and weird and awkward and kind of dorky, but also kind of cool. And like, again, it's one of those things retrospectively, I actually think it's a brilliant performance, but people got so caught up in like, geez, like Hayden Christensen can't act. And whether that was his intent or not, it doesn't really matter, because to me, like, that who Anakin was and the trauma that he experienced is exactly how a human being would behave and speak and engage. And so I even felt that way about Jar Jar. Like, I think I'm guilty of it, and you guys probably are too. Like, it's easy to really love some of the darker aspects of Star Wars, like a Rogue One and Andor, and to get into the dramatic whatever. But I'm also one to say, like, looking back at the prequel trilogy, knowing what George had set out to do, like, I'm in agreement. Like, it's actually pretty perfect in its own right. But yeah, we'll wait on that.
And really, not to mention the fact that, and I think this is separate, but I think that Clone Wars did a lot for Hayden specifically. And I think that some of the additional content, Ben, you had mentioned Count Dooku. I think Count Dooku has gone through such an amazing character arc and supplementation of what he was for Attack of the Clones. And I think that everyone can respect and appreciate a more complex villain than the mustache twirling ha ha ha. And so we've already had that with the Emperor. The Emperor is evil because he's evil, right? So he's almost less of a character and more of just like a theme of evil. But Dooku himself, he was like he was corrupted. He saw something that was wrong and he was right about it. He's Boromir for Star Wars, and I'm glad that he finally got the depth that he deserved, because you look at it and you're like, oh, it's Christopher Lee, this incredible Shakespearean classically trained actor who is just doing like a bit piece or a role to kind of be like to sell additional tickets because Christopher Lee, and because oh, by the way, he was Saruman. So
at the same time that came out.
Exactly, like he was like the villain du jour, much like Loki, and I can't think of his name right now, but Hiddleston, something like that. This is a Star Wars show. This is a Star Wars show. We're not talking. But yeah, like I really resonated with that. And Ben, we've talked online before about how Count Dooku is like a much deeper character than most people give him credit for. He has like it's not an audio book, but it's called like Dooku Jedi Lost. It's an audio performance. It's about 8 hours. Dooku is voiced horribly. It doesn't sound like him at all. So it's like distracting, but the content of the story itself gives us a lot of insight into his character. And Tales of the Jedi was just,
it's perfect.
So I had to get that stuff in.
Yeah. One of the things, I did a video on my YouTube channel, gosh, probably 5-6 years ago, I think. because I posed the question on my Instagram. I was like, who's the better Sith? I think I did a poll on my story, and I did a picture of Darth Maul or Count Dooku, and everybody was choosing Darth Maul, and I was like, nope, you're wrong. I was like, well, I mean, you can.
I remember that post.
You remember that? Yeah.
I said Dooku. I said Dooku. You responded. You're like, yeah, that's right. I was like, if you're talking about like a tool for the destruction of Jedi, that's just like a complete weapon. Yeah, Darth Maul. But if you're talking about getting the end goals of the Sith to eliminate the Jedi, to do it in a strategic, methodical, very thought out way, Dooku by far.
Yeah.
If they had looked different, if their names were different, fans would have felt different. Meaning, Darth Maul's appeal was always in the design, which is awesome. Like, I remember even when they first came out, that leaked images in late '98, and you're like, oh my gosh, like, who's this like demon? But that was always the appeal, right? Like, he had 2 speaking lines in the Phantom Menace, and then he was just this incredible like martial artist. But beyond that, like, I think people were just sort of like, what can we do to bring him back? Count Dooku never got the love because it's another tired old Jedi to the untrained eye. But yeah, totally.
And I think that also speaks to I think it was brilliance on the part of George Lucas telling a story, because he created these Sith, these bad guys, but he created them through Sidious, who knew his story of knowing, okay, at this point in my plan, I need this. I need somebody who's in the shadows, who's going to do some mutilation and damage, and then next phase, okay, I need someone who can stand behind a microphone, influence people, pull the whole thing off politically and all that stuff. And someone who he identified somebody who was dissatisfied with where the Republic was, and he used truth in his life to bring him to evil, right? And that's what the best bad guys are, the ones that can take the truth, twist it, manipulate it enough to make people do what they want them to do for their own cause and end goals. So that's why I thought it was brilliant. And then
is he your favorite Star Wars character, Ben?
No, actually Obi-Wan is. I love Obi-Wan. Always have. Yeah. But
all right, then I got a quick follow-up. Yeah. Alec Guinness or Ewan McGregor, or it doesn't matter?
Oh gosh, I love them both.
Yeah, I had to.
Yeah, but I think Ewan McGregor is. I think when I think of Obi-Wan now, I mean, growing up, I always thought Alec Guinness, just because that's
right,
who he was. But I think when I think of Obi-Wan, what comes into my mind is the visual of Ewan McGregor. But I love them both. They're phenomenal. Sure.
That's really awesome. Yeah, I think Jeff, we had that conversation in an unpublished podcast where it's like we have to respect everything that Alec did for the character. He's played the role incredibly. He was reluctant to take it, as is famous for a lot of actors back in the day. They're like, I don't know about this Star Wars sci-fi thing, but since then, Ewan has done such a good job. He's really crushing it. In his performance, we're not gonna get into the Obi-Wan Kenobi show, but his performance as Obi-Wan and his portrayal as Obi-Wan has just always been solid to me.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I would agree with that.
The show was fine. I mean, we don't need that's probably a different discussion for a different day. But I agree. I mean, when I've even seen deep fakes of they deep faked Harrison in Solo, and I loved it because I was like, oh, this is really cool. This is like what I wanted to see. I actually think it might have been Shamook that did it before he got hired to do season 1 of Book of Boba Fett, but redoing the face. Yeah. But I saw him do it with Ewan over Alec Guinness, and I was like, is this sacrilegious for liking this a little bit more than I should? Because it really worked. I hope we don't get to that point where Disney retcons things like that, and then suddenly we have a special edition version 2 where people are just taken out, kind of like Sebastian Shaw, for example, or even as a side note, Ben, one of my favorite sequences in all of Star Wars, which was the original Latinx scene in Jabba's palace with Sly Soodles as a puppet, and that song was really good. And then they took that out, and it's now the worst scene in the special edition. It's so of its era that but anyways, I hope that never happens. So
it definitely makes you feel like it's 1997 when you watch that.
Yeah. So this is interesting. I wanted to bring this up before, and you kind of redid it. You had mentioned that there's a lot of each movie will be evocative of something based on the time. And when I think of episode 1, Jeff will know this. You might know this, Ben, because we're all from the lovely state of Kansas, or we claim residence to there at some point in our lives. I remember the Kentucky Hut and Taco Bell doing the Pogs, and then the toy releases for episode 1, and really just like the hype of all of the toys back when an entire toy aisle, not just one side, but both sides of the toy aisle, as you walk down, and you might even get double stacked, were all Star Wars. And that just like, that's what I remember. And that's what visually is cued to me when I think of episode 1. Is yours similar? You were a little bit older, but I mean, is it similar? Is there a particular one you want to share with any of the movie releases, any of the 6?
Well, gosh, I mean, each one, there's always something. I mean, the original trilogy, I was a kid, so it was all about Kenner action figures, and Christmases, opening things. I think the biggest one for me when I was a kid was probably getting the Death Star playset from, I was at 1978 or 79. I can't remember when it actually came out. Might have been 79. Yeah, that was amazing. I think that was like the pinnacle for me as a kid. I'm like, oh my gosh.
That is highly regarded as an amazing playset from Kenner. So many people love it. We all follow and interact with the Kenner boy on Instagram, who just he loves that set. And truth be told, like, it's an awesome set. And I recently saw a post where one of the kid models who is in like the front of it actually got like a sealed version of it, because he's like, oh, that's me. Can I please buy this? And they're like, oh, this is cool. Let's take a picture. And it was like him. It was real cool.
Amazing. Yeah, that is a great set. Yeah, and then the prequels, I think I do remember the Phantom Menace. I remember driving to Toys R Us on my lunch break when I worked at Sprint at the time, and drove down to Toys R Us and just everybody was trying to find Darth Maul, which did not exist anywhere. And then I found him in a bin at Walgreens, like, in 2000, after the movie had been out for a while. And I think everybody was like, meh, not what I wanted. So I was like, finally, I got Darth Maul. Yeah. And so I did not do the Attack of the Clones toy line. I think that was around, we were knee deep in diapers and formula for our baby at the time. So all of that stuff went away for me. And then Revenge of the Sith came out in 2005, and I collected every one of those figures. I would, on my way to work, I would stop at Target and toy hunt, and I would literally, I remember one morning racing a guy to the toy aisle, and I was so happy to see him going to the Hot Wheels instead. So I think we were both racing each other, mall walking very quickly to the toy aisles.
Whether this is real or not, every time I am on a toy hunt, I just like look around. I'm like, these people are walking to the store. They're definitely after exactly the piece that I'm after. Let me walk a little bit. I do this every time, and it's like a mother that needs to shop for groceries. I'm like, no, you can get those groceries behind me. I need these toys out of my way.
When you're going at opening, when the store opens and there's another guy standing there, like that's
a giveaway. Yeah,
morning, I was like, this guy, he's here for something else. And sure enough, he was running to the toy aisle, but we were both on our hunt for our own individual things. I just remember it vividly. But I would think, I will say one particular piece that I got during that era that I loved so much. There were two things. One was the Republic gunship from Revenge of the Sith. I still have it. Oh my gosh, that thing was beautiful. And
such a nice piece.
Yeah, me and my daughter would play with that. My daughter loved it. She would play the snot out of that thing. And then they also, around the same era, Target had an exclusive TIE fighter that was, it was the first time they made the panels the actual scale of the movie, right? So that was an awesome piece as well. And it came with the TIE pilot. So anyway, those are some of my favorite memories.
Look, this is why the TVC works, because vehicles are actually possible, like through the 375 scale. So Jeff, go ahead though.
No, the TIE fighter from the Power of the Force 2 line, that was like a Christmas present one year, and it was just I think it was just basically a re-release of what they did in '78. Like it was because the panels are very small or whatever. I will say though, Daniel, to your point, not to like just chime in and be like me too, but I thought the same thing every time I went toy hunting. And like the memory that weirdly stands out to me, nobody on this podcast that's like under the age of 36 will understand what we're talking about. But
Yeah.
it was like August of 1996. And I remember like I woke up one morning, my mom had like a Parade magazine thing. And it was like Shadows of the Empire toys are now being released at Toys R Us. And I was like, well, we got to go. And my mom was like, we have school. It's a Friday. And I'm like, if we don't go now, like we're not going to get them. We didn't go until after school. And Daniel knows my dad, but my dad's built like Uncle Phil from Fresh Prince. And I remember like running as this tiny little kid and my dad just like straw walking, like going right past me. And there was like a mob of people in the aisle. And he's like, which ones do you want? And I was like, all of them. And he was just like, but that was like, it's funny how those Star Wars memories of toys for all of us are so rooted in like these. And it's just like very strange. But I guess let me ask you this on that topic, Ben. I mean, because you said at the beginning, and I think we've all sort of taken the same trajectory. But as we kind of close out here, you know, we kind of bonded over Hot Toys, and I'm just curious, like from the 1/6 scale, not to give you sort of the cheese box question, but if you had one figure that really stands out that you think captures sort of the essence of Star Wars, detail and everything at the Hot Toys scale, and I'm going to make you choose one because I know the default answer is like, I can't choose one. We can't choose one behind us, but what you choose? I mean, what is the favorite figure? You're never going to sell it, you know?
Yeah, it's funny you asked that because there was this time I was auctioning off a lot of stuff, but I was auctioning them so I could go get the next hot toy, right? And I think for me, like it's kind of like what I talked about with the movies. There's the quality of the product, there's the character and what that character means to you, or is it your favorite character? And then there's is there sentimental value in that particular item or character? So for me, I had somebody ask me that same question a couple years ago as I was auctioning off stuff on my Instagram. He's like, what figure would you find it really hard to get rid of? And I said, well, if you ever see me selling my episode 3 Anakin or Obi-Wan, you know that times are bad for me. And I'm selling them because I need the money. But I would say probably it would probably be that Obi-Wan, the Ep3 Deluxe Obi-Wan, for all the reasons I just mentioned. My favorite character, a lot of sentimental value around that particular era of Star Wars for me and my daughter and my family. And then it's just an epic. I think the sculpt is beautiful. I love it. It's awesome. So yeah.
The baby
I'm the only one in the group that doesn't have it.
Oh,
amateur hour, dude. Amateur. The baby Luke sculpt that comes with that figure, by the way, routinely sells on eBay for like $150.
Are you serious?
It's insane to me that like
Ben's like I said I wouldn't sell the Obi-Wan, that Luke toy, that Luke fig. Bye.
Yeah, the baby here. I'm right here. How fortuitous that I'm sitting right next to it. This little piece of plastic routinely sells for like $100 plus on its own, and it's well painted, but it's just a baby. I mean, I could sub in one of my kids' little Tykes figures wrapped in a Kleenex, and they would be none the wiser. So, anyways,
funny.
Well, but all good. Well, Ben, let me just say, before I kind of close this out, Daniel, did you have anything else for Ben, or Ben, anything else you wanted to talk about?
Well, I would love to know.
I'd love to open the floor to Ben to just kind of a favorite moment of Star Wars, a favorite anything of Star Wars, just something that you want to get out to the listeners, 50% of which are on this call right now.
Yeah, the favorite thing of Star Wars. I would just say I just love. I think the thing about Star Wars that whether you're a fan of certain particular eras of Star Wars or not a fan of it, I think the biggest thing that is beautiful about Star Wars itself is how it can be something that fuels families. It fuels something to gather around and be able to celebrate, and that's always. It doesn't matter whether you like a certain era of the film franchise or not. Like even for me, I'm not a big sequel trilogy fan at all. But the thing I love, my favorite memories about that is going to see those movies and taking my entire family to go see them in the movie theater and on Christmas Day. So we would do that. And so that was just, I think that's just one of the beautiful things about Star Wars, you know, that it's multi-generational and it didn't matter how old you are. Everybody loved going to see those movies and having fun with that. So yeah, I think that's my favorite thing about Star Wars. It's not even about the movies itself, just how they fuel relationships and families and that kind of thing.
Hey, and we're bonding over it right now. It's a beautiful thing. It's really, really, I mean, there could be the toxicity in Star Wars that we can all talk about, but as it is a net positive, and it's a net positive by far for all the amazing things that that Star Wars has done for everybody. And I think really a lot of the negativity around Star Wars is that people love it so much that if they see something that doesn't align with their passion and their love and how they were introduced to it, or something it just doesn't fit with it, you know, like the removal of the EU and transition to Legends to wipe the slate clean, like it's hard for us because we grew up with those stories. And so, but I think overall the stories are all so good and they're so positive. And there's so much positivity out of Star Wars, and I love it so much.
Yeah.
It's like family. I mean, we're harshest sometimes on the people we love the most. And I think that's where, like, for me, if people see, even today, I'm guilty of this. Like, I posted some critiques of some things that were recently announced, but like, that's not coming from a place of anger, cynicism. What it's coming from is I clearly proven that I love this. I'm taking an hour out of my day with you guys to like do a podcast. I have a room that I'm embarrassed. I'm going to repeat the meme that I see online. My worst fear is that, like, if my wife ever were to sell my collection for what she thinks it's worth, like, I would have an absolute like meltdown and or like return because oh no. And so, like, it's a time, it's a financial, it's an emotional investment. I always think, like, I always try to tell people that this isn't just me critiquing something because I'm looking for a fight. In fact, most of my memories are so rooted deeply in like a love of Star Wars that it's just, I just see myself probably more as a defender of the faith of it a little bit, but I'm with you. My wife just bought our youngest son native shoes, these little like slip-on shoes, and one has C-3PO and one has R2-D2. My oldest got the Millennium Falcon is what he picked out. And I'm just like, I don't think I'm projecting this on them, am I? I think they maybe actually like it. So
you don't have any influence.
Might be a little.
Hey, my son, my oldest comes into this room and he opens up, and despite all the figures, do you know what he always picks up and tries to steal? It's the Dagobah rock that's next to Yoda. Like, it's a rock. Like, he's interested in the rock and like puts it in his pocket and pretends he's stealing it and leaves. And I'm like, man, there are any number of things that are way cooler than rock.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's all good.
That's awesome. I love it.
Incredible. All right, should we move to kind of the giveaway time? All right.
Ooh, yes.
Here's what I'm gonna do. Here's what we're gonna do, folks. Here's what we're gonna do. In addition to the Sandcrawler, these guys, we're on video now. I've got like 20 of these things. Ben, we're gonna send you one as a thank you.
Oh, awesome.
I've got so many of those things. We're gonna do that giveaway, and that word, the secret word that you have to follow us on Instagram, the Sandcrawler Podcast, all one word, no underscores, and then you have to send us the word Grievous, and you'll get yourself one of these. One of those lucky people that DMs us that also follows Kansas Geekman at KS Geekman, all one word, will also be entered into a raffle that I'm going to not do publicly or anything because we're not going to go live, but it'll be legitimate. Gonna get you one of these cards. I bought one. I told you guys before we started recording. I bought one of these cards a couple of weeks ago in anticipation of wanting Ben to be our first guest. So again, thank you so much.
Yeah.
And I wanted to do this as a giveaway. And when I got the card in my hands, and this is not pumping our guest or anything. I literally was like, I don't really want to give this card away. It's really cool. I love it. I have the refractor version. It came in really good condition. I bought it from like a card dealer. And they like double packed it and sealed it really nicely so it didn't get bent in transit or anything like that. And I just like find myself going back to it. It's on my desk right now with a handful of other hot toys that I haven't packed away yet. or put onto Detolfs, and I just keep going to it. And it's partly because the light catches it when I'm at certain angles because it's a refractor. But
Oh yeah.
I really love this card, and I'm gonna buy a second one so that I still have one, and then I will ship out the one that I have now for a lucky listener that's gonna send us the code word.
Awesome.
I'm gonna
Yeah,
buy I'm gonna buy a PSA Gem Mint one and then send the bill to Ben. That scalpers will take advantage of me. Then you're subsidizing this addiction. I'm gonna say that.
And I will say this too. I'm happy to and I think I mentioned this to you, but I've got like a couple of them here on hand, and I'm happy to sign one if you want to do another giveaway and do a signed one. I'm happy to do that for you guys too. So
give away to some of the hosts of the Sandcrawler podcast.
Yeah, for you guys, of course. I'd be happy
We're
to do
begging
that.
for fans and listeners, but I'm gonna skim off the top first. That's just my
Absolutely,
MO,
I can do that. I'd be happy to send you guys one. For
sure. Yeah. Oh my goodness. Yeah. It really is just such a cool piece, and this is like the exact thing that I love more than anything in Star Wars and this is why I think Filoni, by and large, is so awesome to have an impact on the franchise, is because he was a fan first that happens to have talent in the areas that Star Wars requires talent: storyboarding, storytelling, directing, etc., what have you. You are a fan first, and you were able to then live out that dream. It's a little bit dream of mine, a little bit dream of Jeff to, and maybe yours too, to be like an extra. Just like it, just don't even give me a name, don't even do whatever. Like, let me do a backstory. Let me just like walk in the background. You can cut the scene in the final version of it. I just want to be able to say like, yeah, I was an extra in Star Wars. Here's my story. I'm gonna fanfic it, and there's a trilogy behind this guy. So. It's just like genuinely cool to be able to do it. So I'm peanut butter and jealous of you. But let me say that, like, genuinely from the bottom of my heart, I'm really happy, really appreciative that you came on. Thank you so much for your time. We hope this is one of many. I'd love to down the road do like a check-in. We want to do a couple of different segments. One thing we're tossing around is like, when Jeff and I record, like, what's the most recent thing that we've bought that relates to Star Wars? For me, besides your card, I actually bought this after the card because your card made me do it. Folks can't see. I bought the full 90 card set of the Genndy Tartakovsky Clone Wars, and there's actually like pretty good information on the back of each of these cards. I got the entire set for $15 US, shipped free. I wasn't too concerned about the how good they were, the quality of the cards or whatever, but they actually turned out really nice. I'm not going to get any of them graded. They're probably 8s, 7s, or lower. But in terms of what I want them for, just to look at them, just to read about the backs, they work so perfectly. So we'd love to check in with you.
Yeah, I would love to. And let me just tell you, thank you guys for inviting me. I had a lot of fun. I always love talking about Star Wars. And then kudos to you for keeping the Topps trading card stuff going, because I think that is a hobby that a lot of people forget about in the area of collecting. And I think people would be surprised how fun it can be when you find a good set and just snag it off eBay, and then you'll have a great time. It's a lot of fun.
Incredible. Well, Jeff, any wise words? No? All right, well,
no,
ladies and gentlemen.
I always know we stretch our outros out, but Ben, again, let me personally thank you too. I appreciate it so much, man. And thanks for always just being a good friend to us on Instagram and commiserating with us on things and also getting excited. But yeah, I mean, my wife's going to listen to this, but you're to blame for my most recent foray back into trading cards. It's 100% on you. So yeah.
I'll take the blame.
Just never tell her how much you spent. They give it to me for free. Ben hooked it up.
They're like $1 a piece, right? That's it.
Yeah. It's like that video meme of the guy coming home with the video game system, and he's like, they gave it to me.
I love watching that audio template over all the collector stuff that people bring in. It's real gold. It's real gold. I bet a lot of our listeners know what you're talking about.
Struggle's real. Guys, thank you so much. I appreciate you all. It was a lot of fun. We'll do it again.
Thank you. And as always, our sign off, Jeff, Ben, may the force be with you.
May the force be with you. All right, later, guys.